Well, hello there, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the Sara Show, the podcast where I talk all things medicine to acting and honestly kind of anything else that I want to talk about. That's why it's called the Sara Show. But thank you so much for clicking on another episode. I'm very excited for today's episode because I'm going to be answering all of your questions. So all of the questions that you guys asked me over on Instagram when I did a story all the way into last year, you guys. Thank you for your patience. I don't know why I'm just getting around to this now, but I'm very excited because the questions were very, very good. And yeah, I think it's about time I got into them. Obviously, a lot of these are career related. So for those of you who don't know me and it's your first time tuning into this podcast, my name is Sarah. I'm a medical doctor and I'm also an actress. And I've been sharing more of my journey as a creative, learning to be an actor, auditioning, applying for jobs, all of that jazz while balancing it with like the realities of everyday life. So a lot of these questions will be around that. And I feel like that's all the introduction that you need. Let's get straight into the questions. Just a disclaimer, that there's always a disclaimer, let's be honest. I haven't pre-prepped these answers and I have a feeling I might regret that. Like I probably should have read through them and been like, this is what I want to say to this one and that and that. So, you know, this might be a bit of an on the whim chatty podcast, but I think that's fine, right? That's what podcasts are for. Right. First question. And I'm not going to say the names of the people who've asked these questions because I didn't actually get consent to that and consent matters. So I'll just read the questions. But if you wrote one of these and I answered it and you're happy to be known, then leave me a comment, let me know. Right, so first question. The person is saying, I'm also in a similar boat. How did you start acting / auditioning? Please recommend some courses or classes. Now, this is a great question to start with actually, because I've had so many questions of people asking me what acting school I went to. And I've made the decision just not to publicly share that. Some of you might know, just from scrolling through my posts, you might be able to find out. But the reason why I'm not going to kind of recommend it publicly is because I don't go there anymore. And a lot of the teachers that taught me while I was there also don't go there anymore. So I essentially would be recommending something that I haven't experienced. I haven't experienced it the way that it is now. So I don't want to I would hate to recommend something to you and then you have a very different experience than I did. And I would feel really bad because it did cost money. I did, however, go into how much it cost and how it was set up in my episode 3 of this podcast, all about how I got into acting. But to save you scrolling, I'll just repeat that here now. So it was like a part-time acting school where you had 2 3-hour lessons a week, so 6 hours of contact time. We would put on shows and you would pay £800 per term at the time that I went to it, which was back in 2021. So I did 2 years of that and I learnt a lot and I really enjoyed it. The other part of the question, how did I start acting and auditioning? So I've had a YouTube channel now for like 8 years. I was thinking of this the other day. I was like, in my head, I'm new to acting, but I've kind of had some kind of internet public facing, I don't want to say presence because, you've not read about me on a news outlet. Well, maybe you have, like local Welsh news. But I've always had something out there in the public eye in some way in terms of putting things on social media. And the job that I did, the BBC show that I did, where I was singing with Gareth Malone on this amazing lockdown NHS choir, the way that I got that was that a producer, I think they got my email address from my YouTube channel and was like, hey, can you sing? And I was like, yeah. And I ended up auditioning for that and getting into that. So I suppose part of it is just by being out here on the internet, but that tends to be more for reality TV kind of work. I mean, I wouldn't call that show reality TV. It was very wholesome. But in terms of where I'm just being myself, I'm not actually acting. And then getting into acting, I don't have an agent. I've not had an agent. I was, I guess you could say, street cast. And I met a new friend while I went to a premiere of a movie that I just got tickets for on the internet as part of the BFI festival. That's the British Film Industry Festival. And met this friend who was amazing, who also happened to be a casting director. And she very kindly recommended me for a role that she thought I'd be good for. I didn't actually get that role, but I did get another role, which ended up getting cut. However, I could then put that role on my CV and I got access to a website where I can apply for more jobs. And that website is called Spotlight. It's a very popular website that's used in the industry for casting directors, producers to find actors, singers, musicians, performers. So that is how I personally got into it. That's a very condensed version. I was studying acting at the time. I was actively trying to, meet people in the industry and network and things like that. But that's how I got my first job. Every other job since then, it's honestly hard to keep track of, because once you do one audition and someone sees you there, they might recommend you to someone else. They might call you in for another thing that they're doing. For example, I had an audition for a musical last week, and within the hour of being seen for that musical, I received an audition for a different musical. Are they linked? I don't know. All I know is that I received another audition through. And sometimes people are in rooms that you don't really know that they're in. So that's how it's worked for me. A better process, or what I'm told is a better process, is to have an agent. And agents can help get you jobs because they are so well networked. I don't know if that's a term that I should use, but they have loads of contacts, and they can also just support you in your job, help you with loads of the contract issues, any admin issues that come up, and just really promote you and root for you as an actor. But for me, I'm self-represented, so a lot of the work that I get is from having worked with someone and then they want to work with me again, or they recommend me to someone else. So kind of building my own little network, I guess, of people that might want to hire me. Hashtag please hire me. And I think that's that for that question, right? Yeah, I think that's that for that question. Next question. What made you decide to get into acting? I have always loved acting. So I did a few lessons as a child and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely adored it. I can't remember a lot from it. And I think I just find it hard to know whether I was 8 or 12 years old. I was somewhere between those ages. And my mum put us in for some acting lessons because my mum used to do theatre back in Nigeria. She was a brilliant actress. And she put us in for these acting lessons. And I can't remember why, what, where, how, but all I know is that I loved it. I would listen to Norah Jones, the woman, the wonderful singer who does that song that's like, sunrise, sunrise, feels like morning in your eyes. I would listen to that song on the tape player, whatever we used to use. I had this pink and purple scarf that I would fling over my shoulder and I felt like an artiste. And I loved the acting lessons. I had one audition as a child, which was for Doctor Who. And I remember reading the script. This was, I can't remember how old I was. Let's just say 10 to be safe. I was around about 10 years old. And I had done probably 4 lessons. I literally did one handful or maybe a term of lessons maximum, but it wasn't for long. And I got this audition. I remember reading the script and it was to play the child in one of the main families in the show. And I remember thinking, well, it's not going to be a black family. I just remember as a child just thinking, well, I'm not going to get this job because I'm black. And no one said that to me. My mum didn't say that to me. My acting teacher didn't say that to me. I was just there is no way the main family on this show is going to be black. And also probably being in the audition room and seeing that the parents that I was reading with were just not going to be cast as my parents. But I remember being really nervous in the audition. And one thing I remember is my mum basically telling us that, she couldn't send us to those lessons anymore because they were expensive. And so I had to stop and I begged her. I really wanted to carry on, but couldn't. And then I guess I kind of just carried on with life, and by life I mean I did athletics and I loved athletics. I would carry on singing in my church. So I'm a member of, I'm a Christian and I go to church. I've been since I was a child and I've always volunteered on the church band and stuff. So I was always, I guess, on stage in a way, even though I don't know if it's okay to say that about church band because it's definitely about God and worship. But I was, getting used to being on stage and singing and doing those things. And then at A-level, I studied music. Now, again, you might think that's not acting, but I was part of the Musical Theatre Society and we would do these not little plays. I loved the plays. I thought they were a big deal, but we would put shows together and I loved that. So I did music to A-level. Then when I went to uni and studied medicine, it was a lot harder to find the time, but I just made the time. I really made so much time to be able to do the uni's theatre productions, and not the main theatre productions, but the Theatre Guild Society. So I got cast in a few of their productions and it was mainly singing, But, you know, if you're properly performing, singing is a form of acting as well, in terms of how you're telling a story and portraying the emotions of the song and the character. So I did that. And then fast forward then to working as a doctor, the whole pandemic happened. I was back in Cardiff working full time in medicine. And I did this show that I mentioned earlier, the BBC show, where I was again singing, but basically just creating work. I was watching Netflix because there was nothing else, you know, we couldn't go out anymore. It was lockdown. And I really came to the belief and the conclusion that, like, the arts are so healing, that like what we do in medicine is super duper important, but the arts are super duper healing, and I want to be part of them. I want to help tell stories, share stories, and I just really felt passionately that this was what I wanted to do. So I decided to apply for acting school, and you know, there's so much more to that story in terms of, yeah, there's a lot more to that story. Maybe I'll do a whole podcast episode on it, but that is kind of the long and short of it. It was that I'd always kind of loved it as a child, lived my life, and then I was like, no, like, why did I stop this? I want to do this. And so I just applied to acting school, got in, and started learning how to act with no massive plan of how it was going to work, like career wise. I really took it one day at a time, which looking back I think was brilliant. I think I definitely did overthink stuff, but then I kind of didn't. I just started taking action and was just like, okay, we'll figure that out. We'll figure out how I'm going to swap that shift in order to get to my acting class. And that's kind of how I did it, like day by day. All right, next question. Did you feel guilt? I feel it. Graduate 2025. I know deeply it's not going to fulfill me. Oh, I want to give you a hug. And I feel like I need to message you directly, to the person who wrote this. It's really interesting. It's such a funny thing, guilt in medicine, I think, because it is such a respected and beautiful career. We can be built up a lot in the eyes of the public, and by the public I mean friends, family, and in our own eyes, right? It's an honourable title to be a doctor and to work in healthcare. It's something to be really proud of. You have a lot of responsibility. You have responsibility for people's lives. And so you get to a point, right, where you've taken on that responsibility, but it's also a job. So there's this term that gets used a lot called vocation. And it got to the point to me where I almost felt like that term was being abused in the area where I was working. It was being abused. I was like, you know, you'd flag something up and someone would say, oh, it's a vocation. And I kind of started to dislike that term. I was like, it's also a job. And I think that, yeah, just a reminder that it's also a job. You can have a vocation where you feel called to help people, and you can still help people. Working full-time for an employer, for example, for the NHS, is a choice and it's a job. And you have the right to choose what job you do and how you earn money, you know, how you pay your bills. You have the right to choose that. And there is no amount of emotional manipulation. And I don't think anyone, as far as I'm aware, does that intentionally, but it is something that sometimes we can do to ourselves. We can really pull at our own heartstrings until we forget the fact that it is a job. It is a job that you chose. So when you say that you're graduating in 2025, that means you worked really hard. I don't know if you're a doctor. I don't know if the person who wrote this is a doctor, but you chose that. No one forced you, or maybe they pressured you, but there was an element of choice in that. And in the same way as you can choose something, you can unchoose something. So I guess maybe I should speak personally for me. For me, how did I feel guilt? Yes, hugely. I felt guilt because one thing that I had to do was that when I stopped working full-time for the NHS, I had to locum. Now, if you know anything about being a locum doctors can get paid more than regular doctors because they are essentially called when there's an urgent gap needed. So say if someone calls in sick for a night shift tonight, they need a locum doctor, you call the locum doctor who is sat at home with nothing booked in and can come in at short notice. It's paid more because it can be less frequent work. there was a lot of bad PR, I would say, about locum doctors at one point, because so many doctors were getting overwhelmed with the NHS, and so we're going less than full time, so doing more locum work. And I remember reading articles about locum doctors cost the NHS this much, and when essentially the need to locum is the result of a system that is the need for locums is the result of a system that's not working in some way. There were many times where, for me, I would have much rather been on contract if I had been allowed more flexibility within that contract, but that's just not something that is allowed for very much in medicine. And so I felt guilt about that. I felt guilt about being a locum. I don't feel guilt about that anymore, largely because I suppose I realised the realities of it and my responsibilities, in terms of my responsibilities to myself and to my family, and my responsibilities to my patients. I'm a much better doctor when I am rested. I'm a much better doctor when I'm rested. Being able to afford to get an Uber home after a really tiring string of nights is better for everyone involved than for me driving home really tired. Do you see what I mean? Like, I realised that I can't pour from an empty cup, so I have to fill up my cup. So that guilt, that thing of like, oh, I have to give. If you martyr yourself, you can't save anyone. And I think that is unfortunately what a lot of doctors get pulled into, is being a martyr. And while it's really noble and honourable, it's the most frustrating thing to see, because it basically means that you see good medics lay down their happiness, their life, their well-being in order to continue being a good medic. And at one point, their cup is going to run dry, and then you can't pour out of an empty cup. And it's not something that I expect from anyone else. Like, I don't go up to people and say, how many years have you served for our dear NHS? Are you giving up your youth for our NHS? I would never do that, because it's people's choice, right? There are some people who have never worked in the public service. They've always worked for private companies and whatnot. And I do not begrudge them that. I think that is completely their choice. And so I think it's important to give yourself the same credit, that actually you're allowed to make decisions for you and yourself. Just because you have been able to get through a degree and graduate does not mean that you have to stick with that degree for the next 30, 20, 10, 5, 3 years or months. And I think it's kind of crazy how we will literally guilt ourselves into sticking to a decision that was made when you were 17. Like, you should have seen some of the stuff that I wore when I was 17. Like, baby girl, no, she's not about to run my 31-year-old woman's life. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think things change, times change, and you always have the freedom to choose. You have the freedom to choose. And another thing that hopefully might help with the guilt is that the times where I have felt like medicine was a vocation for me the most, when I was when I wasn't at work. It's when someone faints on the tube and I go the extra mile to help them because I know how to help them. It's when, I'm walking along the street and someone starts having an epileptic fit and I can pull over and stop and help them. And that, to me, is who I am. And it's not just who I am, because that sounds like it's an accident, but it's who I choose to be, and it's who I will continue to choose to be. And so I'm really grateful that medicine has given me the confidence to step into an emergency situation when I'm off duty and say, hi, I'm a doctor, how can I help? And I love that. And to me, that's the vocation. Like, if I'm going to give my time for free, I'm going to give my time for free. It's not going to be me breaking down at the end of a shift that I've stayed 3 hours late for yet again. And someone tells me I can't claim for the extra hours because I don't even know what the reasons were. So yeah, there is a sense of guilt. But I think that when you realise that the best way to help others is by looking after yourself first. It's kind of like on an airplane when the oxygen mask comes down and you put on your oxygen mask first. They tell you to put on your oxygen mask first before trying to help someone else. I think that if more of us did that, the world would be in a better place, truly. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I really believe that. And also, sorry, this is such a big question. I feel like I've gone on and on, but hopefully some of this is helpful. When you say that you know deeply that it's not going to fulfill you, I just want you to think about all the things in life that you love and that you've benefited from. And how many of those things came from doctors? Now, don't get me wrong, I get it. Doctors help people give birth and, you know, they're there from start of life to end of life. But when you think about like a movie that really changed your life for the better, when you think about that song that when you hear it, it just reminds you of a beautiful time in your life. When you think about when you smell a fragrance and it smells like a loved one that you miss and you just feel their presence, or a loved one that has passed. So many of these things were made by people who weren't who weren't medics. There are more ways to contribute to life and to others than just through medicine, and I think that we really forget that. And a moment that really stands out to me since I became an actor where I did feel guilt a lot was when I was performing on stage, on the Olivier stage at the National Theatre, and we had just done, it was like opening night, we had just done the first ever performance, and everyone was nervous and it was great. It wasn't the first ever performance, I feel like it was the second ever performance, it was one of the previews. And halfway through the show had to be stopped because someone fainted. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it. But basically, they called out, "Is there a doctor?" And as I mentioned before, like I've always seen my vocation as a doctor as how I give myself, not just in work, but also outside of work. So there has never been a moment where someone has asked for a doctor that I've not been like one of the first ones there. So I was genuinely on autopilot. I was in full costume on stage behind a curtain because we used curtains in the show. So it was very much during a scene. And I went to walk out. I went to walk out to the audience, and then my stage manager stopped me, and I looked at him and he looked at me and he was like, "Wait." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And in that moment, I realized that I was an actress, not a doctor, that I was, I was very much an actress, and I was not the doctor that they needed in that moment. And it was fine, right? It was actually fine because the person was absolutely fine. They made a quick recovery. And funnily enough, it was a play about the founding of the NHS. So the audience was full of medics. Not full of medics, but I think apparently 10 different people stood up like, "I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor." So they didn't need me in that moment. But it was a moment where I got quite emotional, and I really had to sit with myself and think it through afterwards, because I was like, why do I feel like I've let someone down? Why do I feel so conflicted and so confused? And I think it was because it was in that moment where I saw the practical path of my vocation, of who I believe myself to be, of who I believe I've been called to be as Sara Otung. I saw that it was changing shape. I saw that my vocation was not to be the one feeling their pulse and checking if their heart is still beating, but to be the one on stage performing, sharing a message, a really important message actually that play shared about how much politics can influence our healthcare and just so many different things. And that was my vocation at that moment in time. And there are so many people. That play was just a brilliant play, and it's back this year. If you want to see it, I'll put a link to get tickets in the description of this podcast or video, wherever you might be watching. So I'll be back at the National this year. But that play, the number of people who were moved by that play, who left comments, wrote to different members of the cast and the team, saying how beautiful it was and how much it inspired them, and how pivotal it was. You know, we put that play on during an election year. You know, it was such a movement of a play showing Welsh history, showing the history of the NHS. It was a beautiful play. And I was part of that. And I'm really grateful to be part of that. I don't take that for granted at all. But and I'm not saying, you know, the play, by God's grace, would have happened whether I'd been in it or not. But you could also say that the person who fainted would have been helped whether I was there or not, right? There were other people to do that. But there's more than one way to help people and to bless people. It is not just in saving lives that we can save lives. And I mean that so dearly. It is not just by saving lives that we save lives. It's not just through medicine that you save lives. You can do that through art. You can do that through music. And so when you say, to the person who wrote this question, when you say that you feel like it's not going to fulfill you, I think that's a really important thing to sit with and to think about and to take seriously, because because there is so much that you have to bring into this world. I believe that God has put in you something that you can bless other people with. And the only way that that will come into being, the only way that that will come into fruition is if you choose to make it come into being. You know, I don't believe that God forces us to do one thing or another. I believe that he can lead us with our desires, with our inspirations. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that there are so many ways to bless humanity. And if you're finding that this one doesn't feel aligned to what you are called to do, then I think it's worth finding the one that does. And also, I would say that time isn't lost. The amount of time that you've spent doing your degree and studying, that's not lost. For me, oh my goodness, being a doctor, working as a medical doctor has made me so much of a richer, wiser, more empathetic person. It has given me so much perspective on how blessed we are to be alive and to be healthy and to be able to pursue our dreams. And it has made me appreciate love so much, because I really believe that love is like the most beautiful thing that we can experience in this life. And I got that by being a doctor, by working as a doctor. So just because there were difficulties there and I chose to pivot doesn't mean that I lose all the benefits of that. You know, when I walk on stage or when I pick up a character to study and to act and to perform, I carry with that all of my experiences. So it's okay to change your mind, is what I would say. It really is okay. And in fact, I think it's a really beautiful thing to take ownership of your life and to shake off the guilt, to just decline the guilt, say no, that you're a person too. And the last thing, hopefully, because I've spent a long time answering this question, I do apologise, but the last thing I'll say about this is that one thing that I try to do is I try to treat myself as I would like my future daughter to be treated. So if my future daughter came up to me and she was like, oh, I've done this career, I've done this degree, but I don't think it's for me, I'm not fulfilled, what would I want to be able to say to her? What would I want to be able to see in her life? I would want to be able to see her fulfilled, passionate, believing in herself, taking brave steps, being wise, being true to who she is. That's what I would want for my future daughter. And I think sometimes we don't love ourselves in that way. And I think it's so important to want good things for ourselves. It's okay to want good things for yourself. It's okay to want to go home feeling full and happy instead of overwhelmed and stressed and burnt out. It is not only okay, I think it's a good thing to want those things for yourself. And one thing I always say is that what I want for myself, I want for everyone. So I don't need to be better than anyone. I don't need more than anyone else. I want blessings for everyone else, and I also want them for me. I don't want anyone to be out there burnt out and working for less than they're worth. I don't want that for anyone. I want everyone to be paid generously and I was going to say fairly, generously. I truly want that for everyone. You know, I'm not one of those who will say, oh, but what about how much this person gets paid, or what about how much this person gets paid? I want everyone to have all that they need and more to give. I truly want that. And I think that if we allow ourselves to want good things for ourselves, if more people allowed themselves to want and go for the good things that they want in this life, I think we'd have so much more joy and peace and so much less like envy and striving. So yeah, if you were your own beloved child, I don't know if you have a child, or, you know, think of someone who you love and you feel a sense of like guardianship for, someone who you deeply love, try to give yourself the advice that you would give them. Try to give yourself the grace and kindness and understanding that you would want to give to someone that you love. And I think hopefully that will help you navigate any feelings of guilt, and just know that guilt is just not the final say. It is not the final say. And I think if you're feeling guilty about thinking of leaving a career, I don't know, sometimes I think that might be a bit of a red flag. You know, it's almost like if you went to a partner and you're like, oh, it's not working out, I'm really unhappy, and the only reason you wanted to stay was out of guilt. I don't know, might be a bit of a red flag. Okay, that's the last thing I'll say about that. Moving on to the next question. Speaking of partners, are you single? No, I'm very happily with my wonderful boyfriend. Next question. Are you still doing any medical shifts? You're amazing. I am still doing. Oh, thank you so much for saying I'm amazing. Love how I just like accepted and absorbed that compliment. Like, of course. No, thank you so much. That's very kind. I am still doing medical shifts, so I work part-time as a locum doctor. All right. Oh my gosh, another question about guilt. You guys, maybe I should do a whole episode on this as well. Fellow doctor that quit medicine for a startup here. How do I kill the guilt? Oh, this guilt has to go, you guys. If you have worked as a doctor, I don't care if it was for 6 months or 60 years, thank you. Thank you so much for going through all of the revision, all of the hard work. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe anyone else anymore. You've already given enough. Thank you. That is what I will say. I'm just not doing this whole guilt thing. I feel like I need to properly sit down and think about this and write a good podcast about how to deal with guilt, because yeah, no, we're not doing that. Biggest lesson you've learned from this experience? Oh, that's a good one. Biggest lesson I've learned from this experience. And they've said the lessons can be about anything professional or personal. I would say one lesson that I've learned is to get over myself. And I mean that in like the most beautiful way. Because there were times where I was in a room full of really amazing people, way out of my league, and the imposter syndrome got so much. And the way that I've learned to deal with imposter syndrome is to stop thinking about yourself. Like, stop thinking about, am I good enough? What do I bring to the table? Blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh, it's boring. It's so boring. Like, stop thinking about me and just start appreciating the room that I'm in. Start thinking about other people. So if I stop focusing on whether someone thinks I'm good enough, instead I can start thinking about how blessed I am to be in a room with this person with all their experience that I get to learn from. And so, yeah, getting over myself in terms of when someone would compliment me or when I would get elevated to a position that I had imposter syndrome and self-doubt, it really brought up my beliefs about humility. I think that sometimes we think humility is like saying bad things about ourselves, right? Someone says you're beautiful and you say, oh no, I'm so ugly. Someone says they like your hair and you say, oh no, it's such a mess. But I really do think that humility is the ability to speak the truth about yourself and to accept and speak the truth about yourself. And I think that involves that when you've been blessed with a position or an opportunity, that you are humble enough to accept it gracefully without beating yourself up about it. You have the humility to step into it and to do your best without obsessing over yourself and how you might be coming across. And so that's something that I'm still working on, because it's very easy to just get really self-focused and self-critical on whether you're good enough and whether you're this enough. But I think getting over myself is really good, because there were some moments where I actually was so anxious about whether or not I was doing a good enough job that I actually impaired my ability to do a good enough job. And that was just insane. And once that happened and I spoke to people about it, my wonderful colleagues about it, and realised that they all suffered with the same thing. And I was like, why would you suffer with it? You're amazing. And I realised, oh, this actually has nothing to do with your skill level. It's all about the way that you're thinking and what you're thinking about. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me. Another thing I learned is that with God, all things are possible. Like, there's just no rules. Like, there are rules until there aren't any. Like, someone will say, oh, you can't do this. And then you do it. And you're like, why did you say that? So I think just knowing that, sometimes people will tell you can't do something, but it's not because you can't do that thing. It's because they couldn't do that thing. And that's okay. They're just trying to give you advice from a loving place. But just because it was true for them doesn't mean it will be true for you. And that sounds horrible and harsh. And I'm so sorry. But it's just true, everything is possible. With God, all things are possible. There's never been another you to breathe, walk, live this planet. And so why are you looking for someone else to tell you what you can or can't do? They have no idea. They haven't got a clue. You're the only one who can, with your actions, with your dedication, with your hard work, you're the only one who can show us what you're capable of. So just knowing that there's really no rules, everything's kind of made up. It's actually just a load of people who made a load of rules. And sometimes they don't follow them. And sometimes they change the rules. And so just live your best life, YOLO. Right, next questions. If you could relive your transition, would you take any steps Would you change any steps you took, and why? Oh, this is a really good one, because I wouldn't say that I don't believe in regret. I definitely think you can regret some things, but I have quite a high threshold for what I will say that I regret, because I'm quite kind to my former self. Like, I tend to look back and say, do you know what? I did the best that I knew to do with what I knew at the time. I will always try and be quite kind to myself and say, I did my best and I didn't know any better. Of course I would do differently now because I know better. So that's not really fair to my former self. We're competing on different starting lines. Do you know what I mean? When it comes to this career, one thing that had been really difficult to manage was like finances, like paying the bills, doing this, doing that while pursuing acting. However, I'm really glad I went for it. And so I wouldn't necessarily change that, because I think if I stalled, if I had like deferred a year before starting acting school or whatever, I think I would have talked myself out of it. So I think sometimes you do have to jump in head first. And so hopefully by God's grace, I'll be able to say, everything worked out amazingly, no regrets. But in terms of what I would change, there are things that I would do differently now in terms of what would I do differently now? I mean, I was pretty uneducated. I feel like I could have done a bit more research before certain things, and I wouldn't have said stupid questions like, who's Meisner? So I think I could have been a bit more prepared intellectually, but I also think it was quite good that people knew how unprepared I was, because then they could help me. So yeah, I don't know. I tend to just justify everything that went wrong as to why it actually went right. And I tend to be a very optimistic person, so it's hard to really look back and see something terrible and not be able to see the good that came out of it for me. So even if I massively messed up, I'm like, yeah, but that taught me this. And that was a really important lesson. So if I undo that, would I undo the lesson? And I wouldn't want to undo the lesson. So yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask that question, because I will just be positive about the most horrendously cringeworthy things that I've done. What advice would you give to others who want to make a similar career shift? Oh, I guess that's this whole podcast really, isn't it? I think I would give the advice of just take more action. Like, thoughts are just thoughts. They're just, they don't tell you anything. It's just you pontificating. You're just chatting. And faith without works is dead. You have to do something about it. Otherwise you'll just chat for like 30 years. So that would be my main advice. I think a lot of people think about doing something for ages, but they don't do it. And that is like crippling. Like, just do it. It's not, most things aren't as difficult or as scary as we think they are. We just think that they are. But once you do it, you realise it's not that bad. So yeah, when it comes to like changing career and stuff, I would say more action and less talk. Like, you don't actually need to spend 3 hours a day doing research on YouTube before you make an action. You can do both. You can take action alongside your research. How did you get confirmation from God about making this shift? Ooh, really good question. When I was younger, I was always, can I be frank with you? I was quite good at things. Like, I was naturally talented, which I've come to learn can be a blessing and a curse when you become an adult. If certain things, I wasn't good at everything, You throw me into a pool and you better give me a life jacket, is what I'll say about my swimming skills. But there were certain things that I was good at. I loved singing, I loved art, I loved music. It meant that when it came to choosing things like GCSE subjects, I was like, I want to do them all. How am I supposed to choose? Except from geography. Geography, dropped that with a smile. But everything else, I was like, I want to do them all. How come I have to choose? And then when it came to A-level, I was like, oh my goodness, how do I choose? Like, which one do I drop? Like, I want to do all of them. And so I would always pray, like, God, give me guidance as to like what to do. And one thing that one of my pastors like the leader of like a Christian church, one thing that they said was, they were praying for me, and I was like, I just want prayer on like what to do. I don't know what to do with my life. What do I do in my life? And they were like, the saying is coming to mind for them, and it was basically, it's easier to steer a moving ship. So like, just take some steps and let God guide you as you walk. And there's another verse in the Bible which says, I think it's in Psalms, it basically says, let the peace of God rule in your heart. And so one thing that I tend to do, and I'm not trying to preach a sermon here, you guys, so I do apologise. This is, just me answering the questions. But one thing I tend to do is that I will talk to God about a decision. I'll pray about it, and I will make a decision. I will use the wisdom that he's given me, what I believe he's saying to me. I will follow how he leads me with his peace in my heart. And I found that really relieving. And one thing I always try to remind myself is that, I decide what to have for breakfast sometimes without praying about it, and I feel fine about that. And if there's a certain day where I feel like I feel God telling me that I should do this certain thing, I will follow that. But it's actually okay to decide to have breakfast. It's okay to decide to wear a blue jumper instead of a grey jumper. Sometimes we can actually make decisions, and I think that, don't underestimate how much you've learnt about how to live your life well already. Don't underestimate how much God has already taught you. There are certain things in the Bible that are like, love one another, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So when you're making a decision, just factor that in. Is this showing love? Is it treating others as I would have them treat me? Am I being a good disciple of Christ? And so, I think we can definitely want that bolt of lightning in the sky, to tell us, thou shalt become an artist. But sometimes I think that you can actually also just honour God in your decisions and in your choices, and listen, and he will lead you. And it might look differently in different seasons. And, I'd always recommend praying about things, chatting to loved ones. I do think as well, though, when it comes to non-conventional decisions, for example, going into a certain career path, try to talk to people who are already in that career path, specifically people who have succeeded in that career path, because it might be difficult for someone who has never succeeded in that career path to tell you how to succeed. It just might be difficult for them. And that's okay. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that they can't love you, but it might mean that you want to be aware of where you're getting your advice and who you're getting your advice from. I hope that's been helpful. Oh God, I pray that was okay. What does my working week entail now as an actress? So I've been vlogging this over on my YouTube channel, which has been really interesting and fun and kind of difficult, I'm not going to lie, because I had an audition and then I didn't get the part and it was a bit sad. But my working week generally looks like me emailing people, putting myself forward for different auditions, and then learning lines, rehearsing for auditions, going on auditioning, filming tapes. And I mix that up around my medical work. So I do shifts on the ward between that. And then I also have this podcast. I have my YouTube channel where I film, edit and vlog. And I'm also writing a play. So I'm writing a one-woman play, which I'm going to put on later this year. And I'm really excited about that. And I have my Aristocrat's Girlfriend series, which is an online series, which I film, write and edit as well. So I'm acting also. So yeah, my week can be pretty all over the place. Aside from that, I go to church, I see my friends, I see my boyfriend, see my family, and that is pretty much it. Pretty standard. All right, fabulous. And those are all of the questions. Someone said, why so pretty? You're so kind. You're so kind. Says you. Says you. Thank you so much for all of the questions that you guys left me. I'm really, really grateful. And I'm grateful to you for listening to this. I know that this one has been a bit of a different podcast, right? It's a bit left, right, centre, here, there and everywhere. But I hope that you've enjoyed listening and that you found it interesting. And if there are any thoughts that have come up for you, then please do leave a comment letting me know. I'm really enjoying doing this podcast, so much. And I'm so grateful to you all for listening. So please do share these episodes with friends, family, co-workers, people who you think might enjoy it. And I will continue making them for you. Don't forget to rate the podcast, wherever you're listening to it. Please rate it highly and the platform will recommend it to other people. Join me over on my Instagram, TikTok and YouTube, because I'm sharing so much more of my day-to-day and the practical things of how I film tapes, all of that over on those channels. Thank you so much for watching. I love you and I will see you in my next video. Bye.